Yeah, and I think the other thing that one of the principles that has really become ingrained in me is two sides of the same coin, which is how long things take and how I'm going to say quickly things grow. But I don't mean quick. It takes time, but if you just do what you should do, you keep your head down, you keep it weeded, over time you'll see growth, and it's incredible. It's like, wow, look at this. This grew in my yard. Like, I have this whole corner of nonsense things.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations.
Morning, Justin.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm well.
Are you?
I am.
Feeling good today?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
We, earlier you mentioned we should record a session of us trying to pick a topic.
That would be a podcast in itself some mornings.
This morning particularly.
No doubt.
We were a little non-committal, had lots of ideas.
Exactly.
And we still don't know what we're going to talk about.
We got an idea. Yeah. Where it goes, we got an idea. We got a generalized idea.
We got to start. We got to start.
Exactly.
We're going to hit the ramp. Yeah. We don't know where we're going to land at the bottom, but
exactly.
We'll find out.
Yeah. So tell me, what are you planting these days? I know I see your yard out there, and talk with me about what you're planting.
So, for the listener, I have a garage, which is where my office / this studio is in.
This is where we are.
Yeah. It's not a particularly attractive building. It's a pole metal building. And for some reason, when we moved into this house, there was these little magnolia tree shoots in the woods close to my house. Probably, 2 feet?
I give you 18 inches, yeah.
Some
Justin's
of them
holding his hands apart here for us to view.
They're about this tall, okay?
Yes. Yes.
Some of them are like a foot. There's just a few of them, and I was like, I like magnolia trees. They're really pretty. And I wonder what happens if I dig this up and stick it in a pot and just put it in my yard, and how long, what it'll look like as it grows. And I had no idea anything about magnolia trees, except I like them, and they have those big, huge white flowers that I really love. And it's like, hey, that'd be cool if I could just get a big white flower off this little thing,
Yeah.
So I stuck it in a pot and stuck it by my garage. I'm like, hey, that actually kind of makes my garage look a little nicer with
Sure.
I don't know. And that doesn't really, but it kind of distracts from it. And then I kind of went nuts. I just kept doing that.
Justin was transplanting weeds.
That's right.
But if it was a pretty weed, it was good.
I have some pretty weeds out there. Yes. Yeah. In fact, we have several vines in this area in our yard. Is that
sure? Wisteria.
Every kind of vine is trying to take over our yard and the forest behind us. It's crazy. You got Virginia creeper, wisteria.
I like that forest behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the forest. I like that.
Yeah, the forest that's 2 feet deep
Exactly.
to the neighbor's yard. Yeah. It's foresty enough for the vines to try and take over. That's for sure. We also have a thing called catbrier, which is what I call the devil vine.
Yes.
It's from the devil. We also have a thing called trumpet vine, which has got pretty orange flowers, which is cool, but it's just invasive. Pretty much they're all invasive, right?
Sure.
But the wisteria and the trumpet vine are very pretty. Like the trumpet vine has those orange flowers, and wisteria has really purple, pretty purple. Like they almost look like grape clusters in the spring. Like you just see them all over the trees everywhere, and it almost makes you think, wow, there's a lot of trees that have purple flowers. No, it's just this particular vine called wisteria. So I started to just pluck out little growths and stick them in pots, and I got a bunch of vines growing, just in pots. And so and I've had people buy them from me. Like, they want, they want to put them on a trellis or whatever. And
Sure.
oh, another one is the Carolina jasmine,
Okay.
or some people call it jessamine, which I've been made fun of for because the locals definitely think it's Carolina jasmine. Yeah. So I'm growing those, and then a bunch of trees. Like, I did the Arbor Day. Actually, my brother-in-law, who's a landscaper, Jackson, he started me on this Arbor Day thing where he brought over, I think it was like 6, 7 twigs that he got from Arbor Day. They say, if you donate $10, we'll send you 10 trees. And you're like, ooh, sure. 10 trees. Well, they're actually just 10 twigs, right? They're like a foot tall with a few roots at the bottom, and it's like, that's not what I would call a tree.
Sure.
But, he gave us 6 or 7 at the beginning of, I think it was last spring.
Okay.
No.
Sounds about right.
2 springs ago. And I stuck them all in pots, and pretty much all of them, grew, right? They became like little trees.
The twigs turned into trees.
Right, yes. Right. And by trees, again, don't think of this tree outside your window. I mean, they're, 2-3 feet. Mm-hmm. And 2 of them were crepe myrtles. 2 of them were dogwoods.
Neat.
And they were getting to the point where they were outgrowing the pot, so I stuck them in my yard. I planted them.
Yeah.
And they're growing and the one dogwood at the one side of my yard is basically the same size as I planted it. Sure. Probably, what's this? 2.5 feet, 3 feet?
I'd give you that.
The other
30
one,
inches. On
the other side of the yard is, if you hold a branch up, it's taller than me. Like,
oh, wow.
And it's crazy. Like, we might be able to see it from here.
No, but I hear you.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating to see how stuff grows.
Sure.
But yeah. I can go on. Oh,
have you ever grown a tree from a seed? Like planted?
Yes.
Yes?
Well, ish. I mean,
ish.
So we have a lemon tree.
Yes.
And when we harvested the lemons from last year, we got like 5, and then it got really cold this winter, so we're not going to have any this year.
Okay.
But I got the seeds out of it, but I also got the seeds out of lemons we got from the grocery store, and I put them all in my little incubator thing, which is not hard to incubate seeds, just so everyone knows. You just get a wet, damp paper towel, you stick it in a Ziploc bag in a dark place, warm,
dark place, sure.
And you come back a month later, and you'll see little roots trying to come out, and you just stick it. Yeah. So I did that with a lemon seed, and I have one growing out there. It's probably 10 inches tall.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you went from a seed to a twig.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
You have
I got a live twig right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lemon twig. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking about it from that Arbor Day, and I was even thinking about it from the mustard seed, even if you will. How a mustard seed can grow into a large tree, and yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, turns out, though, it's much easier to grow things from just cuttings, just...
Gotcha.
There's those little branches that grow up from the bottom of the trees that are called suckers.
Yep.
If you just cut those off and stick them in a pot, man, you'd be surprised how many things will grow just by doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Most things.
Yeah.
Most things.
Yeah, it is impressive.
It's almost like they're designed to do that.
Yeah.
It's almost.
Almost.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
I had no idea it was this easy to grow stuff.
Yeah. So where does that passion come from for you? Where would you see that? I mean, is that something is it just the fact that you have a house now and you have property?
Yeah.
Or, yeah?
That was the kicker, right? Because now there's a place to put these pots. I never even, the idea never occurred to me prior, like, to do this. But again, that magnolia, I stuck it in a pot, and I've now planted that. I forgot to mention this. I planted 2 magnolias in my yard, and again, one is probably 4 feet. The other one is also about 5 feet. And but the other one is super wide. Like, it looks like a magnolia bush. It's crazy. So yeah, I think just seeing like, oh, this stuff will grow, and not only will it grow, but it grows a meaningful amount within a year. In my mind, trees took 50 years, right?
Right.
Which they do.
Right.
But you'd be shocked to know like how much, a tree can go from 1 foot to 2 feet.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, it's just fascinating to watch it.
Yeah.
And so I think to turn this into a less nerdy thing, I guess it's all nerdy. Everything we talk about can be nerdy, but
I hear you.
There's something about it, and like once I started getting into this, that's when I started stumbling into a lot of like quotes, and Megan's been gardening more, and so we both kind of have seen all like there's this whole culture around gardening, around growing things, about like it just brings peace. It's a way to, I guess disconnect from all the stuff going on, and I don't know. There's just something about it. Yeah, a disconnection from this and a connection to that, right? Like,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I was sharing with you earlier is like, there's so many metaphors that have come to life as a result of growing my own trees, my own stuff, and seeing, verses, right? Like,
sure.
Talking about be careful about weeds, they'll choke out, growth, and like seeing like, yeah, that's true. I gotta weed my pots, and, so that the thing can grow, and seeing that you reap what you sow, like, as I sow, I dug up some soil from the back where there's some dollar weed, and I planted some trees, and I see, oh, well, look at that, there's dollar weeds in my pot, right? Like, I'm reaping what I sowed, and
whether I recognize it or not,
it
came along for the ride.
It did.
Yes.
Yeah, and then also like you reap what you sow in the good way, right? Like plant a seed, it's turning into a little lemon shoot that hopefully will be a tree in a pot at some point, Yeah. Yeah, and then just like you said, a reconnection, I guess.
I was thinking about that even more because as we were talking about topics, it's like the whole cyborg thing, and how connected we are to technology, whether we realize it or not, type thing, not going that far. But I think there is something to be said for, that balance of connecting with technology and having to do something faster and faster versus the ability to step back towards nature as a balance and to have to weed and to cultivate. And I think there's something to be said for that sometimes I think we miss out on. And I think for me, as you were talking about even that part, it's like I hated weeding a garden as a kid. I really did, because it was just something I had to do. But now it's like if I have a moment to just pull weeds, or when I have a moment, it is just kind of a it's a connection that I can make, and I'm recognizing not that I didn't see the benefit or what's not the benefit, but the opposite of a consequence. It's like the reward, reward to a certain degree. But you can look and say, oh, I can see the plant that is supposed to be growing there, not all the weeds that go along with it. And that's refreshing, rewarding in that context. And yet it's something more than that, because it does seem as if I've almost in my sense of who I am, I've saved those plants from, I've beaten back to a certain degree the things that wanted to take over, and I've created a sense of order to a certain degree. I just and I think in our humanness, that's probably part of what makes us like God, this desire to create order and to beat back those things that just want to be invasive. Not that nothing against your vines or anything, but there's I think invasive. But I think there can be a lot of things in our lives that if we don't beat them back with discipline or structure or that kind of thing, they can invade, and and technology may be one of those things, not to seem like I'm anti-technology, but being able to create those boundaries.
Yeah, that's good. In you know, there's the parable of sowing seeds that Jesus talks about, where you know some seeds fell on rocky soil, some fell into the briars, right, and they got choked out. And I mean, it's very much kind of like what you're saying, where our soil needs. Again, these metaphors just come to life, right? Like, but our soil needs to be paid attention to, and the things growing up around us. And you know, you mentioned technology, which is a perfect example. I work in technology. That's what I do, and I work from home. And so it's so easy for me, especially the first few years, to just plug into the matrix, right? And just kind of live in that matrix. So even when I was around my babies, right, when they were babies, you know, I was looking at my phone. I was still plugged into the matrix, catching up on Twitter, like kind of trying to stay in this network, right, while also vaguely also trying to be part of this one. And you know, that's stuff I had to learn over time. Like, that was choking out the real living plants I needed to nurture, right? Like, the time with my family. And there was certainly a time where that was a sore spot with Megan. Anytime I was on my phone, it was a trigger. And I could be looking at Google Maps, but as often as I looked at Twitter, it might as well have been the same to her, you know? And so, just like, you're on your phone again, can you come back to the family, that kind of thing. And she was right. Like, it took some years to kind of recalibrate, and some accountability, you know? Recognizing, okay, she's probably right. I probably need to work on this. Now, I pretty much gave up Twitter. And that wasn't because of a personal integrity. I did a great job. It's because the 2016 election came along, and I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the vitriol. I mean, that's I think big part of why this podcast came to be was because it was the mudslinging across both lines. All that, you know, division and polarization, and recognizing, like, man, we're just creating these sides, and I couldn't take it. So I got off Twitter and mostly got off Facebook and just started to connect with real people in real life, and you know, and that's been a huge shift.
You started planting.
Started weeding.
Yep.
Started pulling out the invasive vines of Twitter and Facebook. You know what I mean? And I also want to be very clear that there's a lot of benefits to Twitter, to Facebook, to technology, to all those things. And for instance, I got my career started in web development because of Twitter, because of the relationships I built on Twitter.
Oh, I gotcha.
Almost 100%. And I saw the job listing on Twitter. I replied on Twitter, hey, I'm interested. They responded, yeah, you know, apply here on Twitter. You know what I mean? And then someone that I had done some tiny bit of work with in the development world that I met locally responded to those tweets and said, yeah, you should check this guy out. He's done good work. Oh, this is all via Twitter, you know? And that's what kickstarted my career, was Twitter and these relationships. And so I think there's a lot of power in these social networks, and,
no doubt,
and what's available there. But they can become vines that choke out, you know, the stuff that you have. And for some people, that is the stuff they have. The networks they have online is their primary social family, and that's okay. Like, I'm not. This is not about judgment, but I can tell you, well, I think I can say unequivocally, if you have a toddler in front of you, but you can't pay attention because you're staring at your network, your social network on your phone, I think that's a problem. I do. At least it certainly was for me, and I think it's probably true to say generally. Now, again, there's so much downtime in parenting, and of course you fill it with looking at your phone. That's whatever. This is not about judgment. It's just about the balance and recognizing, you know, those weeds.
Yeah.
Getting back to the weeds metaphor. And and I think the other thing, that one of the principles that has really become ingrained in me, is two sides of the same coin, which is how long things take. and how I'm going to say quickly things grow, but I don't mean quick. It takes time, but if you just do what you should do, you keep your head down, you keep it weeded, you know, over time you'll see growth, and it's incredible. It's like, wow, look at this. This grew in my yard. Like, I have this whole corner of nonsense things I'm growing, different trees, different whatever. And again, like, we have a regular jasmine, not Carolina jasmine, but like an actual jasmine vine that we kind of configured into a bigger trellis.
Nice.
And some parts fell off. We cut them off or whatever. So I just stuck them in pots. And can I grow more jasmine and then sell them? You know, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just so cool to see, like, with minimal effort and a little bit of love and attention, like, things will grow. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. I just stuck those in the pots last week. They look the same as they did last week.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I've seen this before, so I know it could happen, right?
No doubt.
And I don't know, there's just something so valuable in recognizing that things take time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But also, they don't take as much time as we think they will.
Sure.
If we cultivate.
It kind of brings back, it brings back that almost a legacy type dynamic, and sometimes, you know, we may not be able to accomplish as much as we think we can in a year, but we can accomplish more than we thought we could in 5 years. Yep. That process of just continuing.
Yep.
And I think you know, things do. It's kind of like with your seeds. I think, you know, the things that are important to us kind of have a way of becoming present. You know, the things that are really important to us tend to last because those are the things that we put our energy toward. We cultivate. Yeah. And those things, you know, over time, they gain momentum. You know, it's like, once if we can get it beyond that seed, if we can get it beyond that twig, we don't mow it over, you know, when it's in the twig stage and the same height as the weeds, and we hit it with a weed whacker, you know, and have to start over again, you know, but once we get it to a point, it can thrive.
Yeah.
And I think
until the deer come along.
Well, you know, and is that even part of the pruning?
You got past the weed whacker stage, and then
Yes, but I think of it, you know, we've done mission statements, you know, and that kind of thing. It's like what the planting is kind of a metaphor for that to a certain degree. And it's interesting as I hear your story, you know, kind of how even as steeped, I'll put it in, as you are in technology, how refreshing that ability to step back to the plants is for you, you know, as you've created that opportunity to step away and recognize, you know, even with your kids, that's a part of the planting that you continue to do. And I think it's a good concept to be mindful of when we think about how we spend our time and you know, our desire.
And also just understanding natural systems is so valuable. I think when you spend so much time online and in social networks and all that, you can kind of lose sight of natural systems, but they don't go away. We just lose sight of them. Yeah. And so, you know, winter has been interesting here because all my stuff dies, right? Like all the leaves fall off all the trees, all my little growing, you know, things, all the pots, the weeds die, whatever. And it's just like a wasteland. And, you know, the first year that happened, I was like, well, that was a fun experiment, right?
Sure.
In my mind, it's like, well, some of this might come back, but there's a lot of death. Like this looks dead.
This is
there's
bleak.
A difference between death and dormancy.
Sure.
Which is, again, something I'm like relearning or learning in a fresh new way with this kind of growing stuff. Yeah. Because in spring you go, oh wait, is that a leaf coming out of it? What? It's not dead, you know? And and then you give it a month, 2 months, and you're like, this thing's not dead. Yeah. It is alive and well. Yeah. And like just looking out there now, it's like a jungle next to my garage because of all the stuff I'm growing. But I know come January or whatever, it's going to just look like a bunch of ugly pots that, you know, I don't know. But knowing that cycle is a thing is so important to growing things,
sure.
right?
So
recognizing that.
In that context for you personally, can you remember, or are you, when you think about being dormant, can you remember a time in your life where it seemed as if you were just in winter? You were dormant.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And yet there was a spring that came because of it or after it.
Yeah, certainly. Man, I mean, there's just a lot of different directions I could go with that. I think of less dormant and more like the seed stage.
Yeah.
Was in my early 20s before I started doing any real work on myself, and and life was just tough, and life didn't make sense, and everyone was against me, and I was trying to figure out my place in the world. And then I started I read the book 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, and right near the end of reading that book, I started my first Celebrate Recovery 12-step group. And between those two things, that was like, going from a seed to a seedling. It was like, whoa, there was a lot of things missing. And now that I have some fertilizer and some knowledge, like I can cultivate some things, I can immediately see growth, immediately see, these leaves popping out. I can see how in the future maybe there'll be some fruit off that branch, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So again, that's not necessarily dormant, but then there's been periods where, I was growing, and then, one example is I was a house painter, and I painted houses for a living, and that was what I did. And then 2008 happened, that whole housing dilemma and economy nonsense, and the painting houses wasn't a thing anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Who's gonna paint their house, and they don't have the money to buy food, right? And so I lost my job doing that, and so for about 2 years I didn't have a official full-time job. I did a lot of odds and ends, little painting jobs for people, and did a lot of volunteer work. But I would say those 2 years was definitely a season of dormancy for me.
Yeah.
But out of that, this whole thing about that Twitter conversation I was saying, this came as a result of 2 years of dormancy, slowly into working on my skills in terms of building websites, and just as part of my volunteering efforts, and recognizing like, hey, I think I can maybe promote this as a thing in terms of getting a job and or freelancing. And so I did some freelance, which I was able to use as part of my
freelance? Yeah.
Are you talking about the air conditioner? We left the air conditioner on, so you might hear a buzz. That's all right. So I don't know. That's one example of, I think, dormancy, where then I got into this career, and it was like my life kind of took off in a sense where, okay, now I have this new career path, and I loved it, and I did really good in it. And that was part of the getting lost in my social network, Twitter, and was just a passion, right? Like for this new growth, this new journey. So again, I want to be careful not to overstate things, because I think we so easily can vilify things that are not the villain. The problem is inside of us, and we say, oh, social media is the problem. Social media is a problem, especially if you're not pruning it, But I don't know. Does that count? Of
course, no. That's why it's just
your off the cuff, very deep question.
Well, was that off the cuff? Yeah, I suppose. But still, I was thinking about it in that context of I think I think it's important that we're able to see, because I think so often we can look at our current dormant stage, if that's where we find ourselves, and say, and go to that black and white thinking that says there's nothing good here. Yeah. This is terrible. This is awful. I can't deal with this. And yet we've been there before, but it's only by hindsight that when we look back, we can say, oh, okay, this is another dormant stage. There's a preparation that's happening here. I may not necessarily be able to see it, but yet the materials are here. Like you shared, all the things were in place, the fertilizer and what have you. But then there was this moment where I did this, and then suddenly everything shifted, and it became like that springtime, because, in the midst of that context, everything was available. I just needed to make a little shift. And I think, so often in our humanness, we can say, no, this is terrible. And we just try to avoid it at all costs. And we end up exerting more energy and going down a road that might be unhealthy, just trying to avoid it versus being able to sit with it and recognize it as a cycle, as a season, and being able to move forward in it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a very personal correlation to what you're saying in that, I've talked about this before, but I've struggled with depression once in a while. And
sure.
Last year I did some counseling with someone for a period of time, and right along that time is also when I have gone through my first winter here, seeing those things die and kind of start to come back. And there was and basically one of the big takeaways from that season of counseling and working through some things was a recognition of the value of winter. Because to me, winter was always a reality, but I hated that reality. Especially, I grew up in Minnesota, so winter was long, and it was gray, and it was cold.
It was most of the year.
It was most of the year, yes. I mean, for real.
No, I see.
9 months, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you'd see, spring around the corner, and then you get a snow dump.
Yeah.
And just crush your spirits. And, so it just was something that I always saw as a reality, but not something I felt was valuable. You
didn't see the value in it. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things the counselor worked with me about. He wasn't using this metaphor, but just understanding like some seasons of downtime and whatever, just all these things, they are valuable for various reasons. And I was able to recognize, for me, very specifically, winter is triggering. At the beginning of fall, things, the seasons get, the days get shorter, a little bit darker, a little bit cooler. Things start dying, things start falling off the tree, leaves, etc. And it all just represents death and depression and discouragement for me. And so I've done a lot of work recently to try and rethink those things. And then specifically winter, recognizing, and this is something, Meg and I have talked about too, like there was some Saturdays that I spent all day Saturday with the kids playing Fortnite.
I remember.
Because it was winter. Yeah. And there's no pots to tend to.
Yeah.
There's no yard to mow.
Yeah.
And it was the season for that, and so she and I have talked about that a lot. Like, as I've talked to her about kind of my new, embracing of winter and all that. There are good things to winter. There are good things to that time of dormancy, and rest is a big part of that. Where, there's just so much go in summer, and it's all fun, and it's all good, and I love it. But I recognize I couldn't maintain this all year long. Yeah. But I've never had to. Yeah. Right? I mean, it never occurred to me to have a sense of gratitude for that cycle. Yeah. And to embrace that cycle. And so that's what I'm really working on. And I think, I do think the planting things and seeing those cycles, seeing the value of winter and how things come back to life and how it doesn't kill them. And in some cases, the dormancy creates resilience, right? Yeah. Whatever. Just all those things are all tying into this journey, which is very interesting.
And I think it's interesting, too, when you think about it in the context. It almost, when you think about winter, next winter's coming.
Yeah.
And yet you also know the next spring is coming.
Yeah.
And it almost makes, from my perspective, it almost makes the years shorter.
It does, yeah.
Because
Interesting.
because you know, it's like, it's not like endless summer. We recognize that. And it's like, okay, what I'm not going to get done this year, I might be able to do next year. You know, and say that crop or those plants, you know, don't do well this year, the season might be better for them next year. You know, and I think there's a optimism in that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we can recognize, okay, yeah, that didn't do well, but then again, this did do well.
Right.
You know, I had this area of growth, you know, and those seeds that I planted had a good return. Maybe not the ones that I thought I wanted to, but I think, you know, in that concept of planting, you plant it all. And you recognize that, okay, this is the year. And we, in our garden, we planted a bunch of stuff. But, you know, with Chris's dad and, you know, the weeds that came up while we were, you know, she was there and I was trying to tend to, you know, the weeds that had to be weeded, you know, prioritize. It's like, you know, we come back and, you know, and we're calling this is the year of the cucumber. Because, you know, the funny part of it was, you know, we took our composting out and we scattered that, you know, on the ground and rototilled, and it was, so somebody had evidently thrown some cucumbers, you know, seeds in the compost, so we got these cucumbers. But, you know, this is the summer of the cucumbers. All the stuff that we planted maybe honestly didn't do as well as the cucumbers that we just kind of put out there accidentally with the compost, to be perfectly honest. But, you know, it's like, that's a reminder for me that, yeah, okay, this is the year of the cucumber. But at the same time, you know, the other plants are doing well, but it's just the fact that I think sometimes our plans can be a little more, they don't always have to work out the way that we thought they would.
Right.
And even when they don't, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
And there's a reason. Yes, I agree. There's a reason that the Bible and Jesus uses nature as a metaphor so often. Look at the flowers of the field. They don't worry about tomorrow. You know, look at the sparrows of the air. They're happy and happy-go-lucky because they know they don't have to worry about their food tomorrow. It'll just be there. They understand the systems intuitively. They were created for that. And so were we, you know. And, you know, this whole idea that you just described where I had plans for this thing to grow and flourish, but instead this thing did, is very much exactly how life works, right? And if you have this metaphor of creation to look at, it's much easier to say, yeah, this is natural. This is like you said, now we can appreciate the cucumbers and recognizing the humor that's there and the irony, but also recognizing that, but hey, we got cucumbers, you know, and it's not, all is not lost or whatever. Or for me, like some of the trees I planted last year, I was really excited about. Like I planted a bunch of fruit trees, and I would say none of them really have grown that much. The apple trees grew quite a bit last year, but this year not much at all. And I don't know why. I don't know what that's about. But then, like I said, that dogwood tree just exploded. Like it's growing, and it was a little guy in my pots, and now it's almost bigger than me, and that's really cool, you know. And then just seeing how some things grow, some things don't, and it's all part of the system. It's all part, you know. And I think, again, living in the digital world, it's easy to lose sight of the natural systems at play, but yet they still are. Like, in fact, if you look at our sales numbers and stuff for our product, you'll see that there are correlations to the natural seasons of the year, you know what I mean, and various things, which is, I think, is fascinating. You'll see habits shift as the light, there's less light in the day. Even though we have lights we can turn on, we still act differently, you know. And also, like, you might plan for a season that this thing that you planted, you're going to grow it and cultivate it, and I mean in business, right? and then find out, oh, this other thing is flourishing. I guess maybe, and again, just like in real life, you can continue to try and cultivate this thing that's not super happy and force it and try and fertilize it, whatever, and maybe you get some growth out of it. Or you could say, maybe we should focus on the cucumbers because they're doing really well, and maybe we can figure out a new plan that works with that because it's something we didn't anticipate. And it's these natural systems are throughout life, and I think, like you said, using the word connected, when I get reconnected to those natural systems, looking at my pots, weeding, looking at the new growth in the spring, it really enhances my view. It's like a enhanced vision into the rest of life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what I'm enjoying about it too. It's just, man, these metaphors just pop to life when you see it in reality in real life plants,
Yeah. I was thinking about it even with as you brought up the apple tree. I think, so often we may plant things that are pretty, but we may not necessarily plant things that are fruitful. You follow me? A bush versus a tree, an apple tree or something. And I'm thinking about that, from that aspect of what things are you planting for long term? You follow me?
Yeah.
And what things do you desire to see become more and more fruitful in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? As I think about, those apple trees of our lives, if you will.
Well, before I get into the deep answer, you mentioned the magic number 20, and it made me think of my favorite quote about trees, which is, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago.
Sure.
And I've thought about that quote so many times.
Yeah.
Because it's like, a lot of the trees that I'm planting, there's no guarantees I'll be here in 20 years.
Yeah.
But if I am, I'll be so thankful I've stuck it in the ground today. You know what I mean? And also recognizing that 20 years is not the payoff. Although, being new to this, I thought it was, right?
Right.
But 1 year you get a payoff. 2 years you get a payoff. Every year you get to see a little bit more growth. Your landscape looks a little bit different because now it's this tall and not that tall. And now, I can't see that thing anymore because this tree's covering it. And I don't know, just like it's interesting. And also, too, recognizing that when you plant a tree, you don't plant for this thing that's 1 foot tall by 1 foot wide.
No,
You have to think about what is this going to be in 20 years. And that's how I have to plant it. So when they tell you how the distance to plant between, it's 6 feet, 12 feet, depending on the species.
Feet. Yeah.
And you're like, but this is tiny,
Exactly.
But
it needs to be up close to the house where it can be protected.
It's so cute. And we got to take care of it. And just when you plant things, you plant for that growth. You plan for that growth. And so, now you can tie that back into what you were trying to say.
Well, no, I was thinking about it. What from that aspect, what are you planting now for 20 years? Because Mark Batterson, a circle maker, he talks about the guy that planted the tree. I forget what the tree was, but he, planted a tree for his grandchildren. Because his grandfather had planted trees for him to benefit from. And I was thinking about that as we think of, what are you currently planting? What do you have with that mission statement, possibly that 20-year? What are you doing today with that? Okay, 20 years from now, still the year, the 5-year, the 10-year benefits, but what are you planting for?
I think a few things that certainly come to mind are, a primary one is relationships and recognizing that, just kind of going back to that, looking at Twitter instead of my 18-month-old on the floor, 8 years ago, right? And recognizing that the relationships in front of me are the kind of the 20-year plan.
Yeah.
And the Twitter relationships are not.
Yeah.
You know?
I hear you.
There'll be new Twitter followers in 20 years. The face on the other side of that Twitter screen usually is interchangeable. No, I've met a lot of these people, and they become real friends, and that's the benefit of a social network, right?
Sure.
These are real people you can become real friends with. But all that being said, some of the relationship, and that ties very much into Celebrate Recovery too, and recognizing that some of the relationships that I have built through the years through Celebrate Recovery are now those 20 years later trees in my life that they are core parts of my family, a lot, extended family, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, this isn't I'm sure not the answer you were looking for in terms of like whatever, but relationships to me are so important and to cultivate them. They're like trees to me, like all my little trees that I'm growing out there. It's like if I can add a new tree and cultivate it, that's awesome. There's no such thing as too many trees growing in your yard, in little pots, and you're cultivating them and seeing how will this play out or whatever. Yeah. And maybe we give it away. Maybe, maybe someone wants to buy it on Facebook Marketplace. Now the metaphor is breaking down.
This podcast is brought to you by Justin's Trees, Justin's Plants.
Exactly. That's a good idea. No, I mean, I'm not going to put my friends on Facebook Marketplace because it didn't work out. But you know what I'm saying. It's really, there's almost no downside to cultivating new relationships. Now, there are definitely a limit to the number of relationships any given person can have. It.
Sure.
I heard in a good book it described as like Lego pieces. Like some of us have we're a big brick, right? Where we have 8 connector blocks, and we can connect to 8 other relationships. And some of us are the 4 or the 2, and we're we need 2 good relationships. And
sure,
so they're not all built the same. And I recognize that, and I recognize there's a limit. But I don't know, the investment in people through Celebrate Recovery and some of those relationships has been a key part of, like, when I think about walking down the aisle to my own funeral and what people are saying or whatever, to recognize that hopefully people would say he was a person who invested in people, you know what I mean? Who built relationships, who was a friend to anyone, that kind of thing. And it takes work. It takes cultivation. And I don't know, in terms of like building a thing or creation or whatever, this podcast is part of it. Like being able to communicate things I've learned is a part of like a 20-year legacy, whatever that is, that I want to have done. I want to have shared some of the things I've learned with anyone who will listen. Well, this is a great avenue for that, right?
Yeah.
And, the number of people that will listen is not up to me, but what is up to me is to share, and I feel like that's part of that 20-year plan is...
Sure.
Yeah. What about you?
From a 20-year plan?
Sure.
Yeah.
Answer your own question.
Yeah, by all means. It's interesting because I think about my own kids, of course, and I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son, and I think about it. I do think about it from the aspect of, that opportunity to watch them, kind of become their own individual, and recognizing that, another 5-10 years, there may be grandkids, there may not be, but at the same time, the reality is it's a possibility. And I think about it even in the aspect of, what we're doing, with the ministries we desire as far as, renovation and out to the property, and eventually, Sparrow's Rest type thing where, ultimately it's about, wanting to invest in other marriages, help people with their marriages in such a way that, they survive this 5-year type awareness that they're, currently in this tornado, if you will, of, getting married and the reality of their, relationship and how they've shifted from, that friendship focused relationship to a fixed focused relationship, that it's about fixing what's wrong with you, versus accepting who you are and recognizing that our differences are what can, help create that growth, if you will. And it's worth our while to continue to cultivate this relationship, because there's a lot of weeds that need to be taken out of the relationship. But if we can focus on it, I do think our marriages are much like gardens. We want to think at times that they're just able to maintain themselves. I can do my thing, you can do your thing, and we'll just still have a wonderful marriage, and it will go the distance, when in reality that's not the case. Because there are things, the wilderness comes in and we got to beat that back, and we got to cultivate our marriage. We got to cultivate our relationship in order for it to grow. And it's going to take work. And I think sometimes, in our culture, if you will, people don't realize or don't want to recognize. They want to, they want to maintain a feeling. And, and once that feeling is gone, well, then so is the relationship. The marriage is it's just, you're the wrong person. And it's the desire to continue to cultivate who I am, kind of like you described, and recognize that, healthy individuals make healthy relationship, and I think that becomes part of my message, or part of our, I of course include Chris in that, whatever I do, she just makes it better, when she's with me in that process of encouraging, couples and so forth. But I think for me, I've probably been doing this almost 8 years now, as I look at, from a timeline perspective. And that's what I want to be doing. That's what my passion is, that's what I want to be doing. I want to be, helping people cultivate relationship, that has a legacy for each and every person, and I think, that becomes my, 20 year, that becomes my 25 year,
Yeah.
For me.
That's good. That's really good. I think it's interesting that relationships are a key part of both of what we share.
Oh, sure.
I think the reality is that is one of the most important things we can grow in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
That's family. That's friendships. That's If you don't have those things, what do you have?
Yep.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No.
And I think I feel for people, who do have to move frequently.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or, because of their job circumstances or whatever, to where I think about it even as we went home, and, for Chris's dad and that kind of stuff. And I see my parents, and my parents, have been in their house for, since the 60s, so 60 years.
They've got some trees.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. They've got some trees, and and I see the blessings of that. I can also see sometimes, the more we're in a space, our world can become smaller, and with age, I think that can happen, and that's no offense to anybody that's aging, but it's for me like too. You are, but I think about it in that context of, people who don't have or it's difficult to build long-term relationships, because I think about it, even, probably some of the closest relationships Chris and I have are the people that we raised family with, in this area, and, that our kids grew up together, that created a lot of connection. And I think about it from that planting dynamic, to where, so that's kind of what comes to mind there. And I do feel for people that are, very transient in their jobs, and military even, I think,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the key is still to build relationships.
Yes.
You know, and I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to give advice for that, but I know that's still key. Right?
Yeah.
And
no, I hear you.
You were talking about the people that you spent your life with your kids growing up, and how those tend to be the ones you end up being close with. It made me think of this metaphor, which I think is just so beautiful, which is those really tall, pine trees that you'll see in forests. Often they're, 120 feet tall and just a toothpick, right?
Right.
And yet they're in a forest full.
Sure.
And, a big storm will come along and they're fine. Nothing happens. And you think, how does a toothpick stay up in the storm? It doesn't make sense. And then what you'll find out is if they clear cut a bunch of that land and there's still a clump of them, well, now they can't withstand. And it's what it is the roots. Sure. The roots grow in and around each other. Like I'm crossing my fingers, you know?
Yeah.
And what happens is that creates that stability. So when the storm comes, well, I don't have to depend on just my roots. When I lean, your roots are holding me down, and the person, the tree next to it is holding its roots and we're all embedded in that creates that strength and that network, right?
Sure.
Where these trees are going to grow similarly and be similarly protected and going to be in, have similar ideologies even, and they're going to look similar because they're in the same root system. And I don't know, I just think the metaphors don't stop. They never stop with trees.
Yeah.
Are we good to wrap up?
I think so.
My thought was this as we wrap up.
Yeah.
Get a plant. Just get a plant. Learn how to cultivate a plant. Maybe you get a garden. Maybe you do like I did, stick a little treeling in a pot. But do it. Because I think you'll be shocked at like the value that you find. Or maybe you kill it. Well, get another one. Try again.
Sure.
Try putting it in more sunlight. Try watering it less. Google it. See if there's a way. I think you'll be surprised at the value that it can bring to your life, which is so weird.
No doubt.
But it's worth it.
Yeah. So this is how we see it. Go plant something.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like how I see it, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.